It's Ros from Scully Darling About Books.
And Tilly from Tilly's Shelf. And we're here to do our monthly discussion, a little bit belated, of a modern work of fiction, a new release from the 2020s. So this is May's book. We're a little bit behind, and that is Brotherless Night by VV Ganeshananthan. So we picked this to read in May because it was one of the shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. And we've read a couple from that list. And it has subsequently won the Women's Prize for Fiction, deservedly so.
Yeah, we were both happy, weren't we, to see it win, yeah. I think. Although there was a couple of other things on the short list that I also would have been very happy to see win, one of which was another of the books we've read, which was Ed to Ghost by Isabella Hamad.
Yes, yeah, that would also have really deserved it and definitely deserved to be in the short list. We also read The Wren by Anne Enright, which was, again, on the short list, but I personally really felt that Brotherless Night, for me, would definitely have won over The Wren. Which it did.
Yes, I like Anne Enright and her work a lot, but The Wren was not, for me, her best book. So I was pleased that Brotherless Night was the winner.
Yeah, and this book for me was so powerful, so well written, so emotional, so complex that it was just on a whole different in a different sphere, I suppose.
It's a very intense book. When we do these conversations, we always avoid spoilers, and I wouldn't normally do content warning or whatever. That's not really me, but I think it's really important before reading this book to be aware that it is about a civil war, and it's civil wars are brutal, and this book doesn't hold its punches on that.
I think that's part of what she's trying to do, is really to accurately and honestly portray how a civil war affects the individuals living within it. So I think it's the way that it's handled is sensitive and respectful, but just honest.
Absolutely. It's one of those books where there is no gratuitous use of violence, say, or descriptions of those things, but there's an awful lot of that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. The stuff that's in there is sort of it's necessary for the book that she's writing. There's no over dramatization. There's no there's no excess. It's just this is the reality of what they were, even though it's a work of fiction.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to that, shall we? But do you want to give us a little kind of what's the setup? What's the plot, as it were?
So it starts in Jaffna in 1981, which is one of the largest cities in Sri Lanka, and it follows a sort of a typical middle class family, where the kids are in school. A few of them want to train to become doctors. They've kind of got ambitions and lives ahead of them. And the main character is a young woman called Sashi, and she's got four brothers, some of them older than her and some of them younger than her, and it starts with, I guess, a bit of scene setting of them as a family, but then the introduction of little bits of political tension, little bits of unrest and uncertainty, which then escalates into the full-blown civil war. Sort of is considered to start around 1983, and it covers that period up to 1989, and then there's a prologue epilogue that's in 2009, which is when the war was sort of brought to a close, although it was quite sporadic at times in between. So we're very much we kind of focused on the first part of the Sri Lankan Civil War in the 1980s, but we get a sort of a wraparound that kind of brings it to the whole when the war ended, which is very so it is, in a sense, it's telling us a story of the Civil War, but through a family, and through in particular this central young woman character that we can
latch onto and identify with and connect with, so that it's a very which makes the story, you know, very vivid and affecting, because you meet her as a kind of typical, you know, teenage schoolgirl with, you know, got to do lots of, got to keep up with her brothers, got to do her schoolwork, you know, hoping to study hard and get into medical school, you know, like, you know, and then life changes. And I think maybe that's something you might want to say a bit about the how.
Yeah, well, I was also going to say, you said we meet her as this young woman, but we meet her in the prologue from 2009, where she quite openly says, you know, she talks about somebody appearing from her past that she hasn't spoken to in a very long time, and she says this person is really a terrorist, and then she says, you know, but you know, you might think that I'm a terrorist as well, and that's what you get from the prologue, is this knowledge that actually her life isn't going to progress as it would from the first chapter, if that makes sense, that you know that things are going to get worse for her, I suppose, or that she's going to face those kind of the moral complexities of living under a civil war. But yes, going on to the family, I think it's really effective the way that Ganeshananthan uses the family unit as a way to kind of represent the country, in that in these first few chapters we see this kind of normal family with kind of normal stresses and strains and things, but they kind of stand together, they work things out together. When they're talking about these first political events, it's kind of like, well, if one of us is going, you know, we're all going, you know, we're not splitting up on this, we're all gonna go as a unit, and we're all,
or like the bicycles. The bicycles.
Yeah. If my brothers can't ride their bicycles because it becomes unsafe for young men to ride around on bicycles, is like, well, I'm not going to ride my bicycle either, because, you know, in solidarity with them, and kind of they're getting each other out, you know, they're holding hands with each other to pull out of crowded areas where there's unrest and so on. And then you just see how this kind of family unit gets a bit dented and a bit damaged, and then just disintegrates from there, bit by bit, and it kind of escalates into sort of distrust, differences of opinion, to the point where she's sort of thinking, I don't know what my brothers are capable of, I don't know where they are, I don't know what they've been doing, I don't know what they would do, and likewise her parents don't know that about her. And it's really emotive how you see that those divides opening up, and how they never want to be divided, and yet somehow they are, by the circumstances that surround them.
Yeah, and that really mirrors the position in the country, in that, you know, any civil war is always about communities that have, you know, this is about communities that have lived side by side with various sort of pressures and tensions, becoming more and more opposed to each other, and doing things that they, you know, you could never have imagined that they would do to each other, and and that's the family and the country kind of work as reflecting halves in the book, and almost.
The gradual process of that, and the way that she takes it over this long time period, you can really see and understand how, you know, these things don't just happen overnight, they kind of creep in, and they escalate.
And that what you are willing to tolerate or not, and what you're willing to do or not, shifts.
Changes. It does change.
And I don't know about you, but I found myself questioning myself, you know, how would I behave if I were in that situation? That's the strength of the book, isn't it? You really think, what would I do? Where would I, you know, where would I draw a line?
Interestingly, and I obviously we don't want to say anything too much about the sort of the towards the end of the book, but I was reading it, and I was reading her actions and her decisions, and I was thinking, obviously she at the start she refers to herself as, you know, you would think I was a terrorist, but I don't know that she ever actually crosses a line in terms of what she does. Like, a lot of what she does is motivated by things that I would see as the right kinds of motivation, sort of family, friendship, caring for others, trying to help people to recover and keep people safe. But the situation that she's in means that, you know, if she's caring for somebody, but that person is themselves a soldier, when she goes, so she wants to train to be a doctor, so she's using her medical skills, you know, that puts her in a position where she is complicit in the wider sort of events. And it's so complex because, yeah, like you say, you do think, well, what would I do, and where would I stop, or would I stop at that point?
Yeah. One of the things that I found sort of striking about the book for me was that it read almost like a memoir. It's not.
Yes.
But that's the feel of the book. You know, you're with Sashi, and you follow her over sort of a period of time, a long period of time, but also you're like in the head of the older Sashi looking back at herself, and then in the head of the younger Sashi as the events happen. And I heard, after I'd read the book, I heard, in fact, it was at her acceptance speech at the Women's Prize announcement. She said that she'd spent nearly 20 years writing the book.
Wow.
And which kind of made
real labor of time and effort. Yeah,
absolutely. And she's American, but her family are Sri Lankan. She has family there. You know, her parents moved to six, and it's very clear that she, you know, did lots of speaking to people who were eyewitnesses, who did live through the Civil War. So it has that sort of, as well as reading, you know, accounts, records, human rights, you know, UN, you know, statements about it, you know. So you know, that level of research, but is both at a sort of factual level, but also at a more personal level. So hence that feeling of a memoir.
Yeah, and I'd say one of the really important themes of the book is about that sort of, we touched on this earlier, but that recounting, that telling, that reporting of experiences of war. And Sashi as a character quite early on is involved in a situation that afterwards she has to then recount accurately what events were and how things came to happen the way that they did for her specific sort of family unit in that situation. But then later on she takes on a role where she is receiving people's accounts and processing them and trying to kind of accurately create a history is the wrong word, because she's recounting things that have only just happened, but a documentation of the ongoing atrocities of the war on all sides. And that's a role that she kind of steps into, and the book in itself kind of works as a reflection of that. This kind of the need to tell those stories.
Absolutely. So that kind of like bearing witness to something and capturing you know, the voices of the time, because and I think that it, one of the things that then she brings as the author to that, as Sashi's character does, is a feeling of like a wish to be honest, and it's very hard to be impartial in a civil war, isn't it? But to that, there's that attempt. And then as a writer, she you know, she's a sort of Tamil background, but she's trying to be like very respectful, but also very sort of fair and even-handed, or you know, in how which, you know, is a very challenging thing to do in a way. I mean, it's easier to just, you know, to not attempt that, but yeah.
And she does bring in, although she fictionalizes them, she does bring in some real sort of figures from the time, and particularly in terms of that being able to be kind of critical or analytical of the situation. She brings in a university professor who was a human rights activist, who we'll just mention, Rajani Thirunangama, who did have this role of firstly being active in the sort of the Tamil militant groups, but then stepping back and saying, actually, what you're doing isn't right and what you're doing isn't currently acceptable. And in the book and in, well, yeah, and I guess faces sort of consequences from this.
Yeah, so there's a fictionalized version of her in the novel, but
who works as like a role model to Sashi.
And takes that role of trying to record and document events for like, yes, so that they're not lost, and so that people do know what happened on all sides as far as possible. So yes, that's the strength of the book. That makes it sound, the fact that, you know, obviously she's written it with a kind of like a purpose, that makes it sound as if it could be a bit sort of either a bit dry or a bit pious or a bit sort of preachy, but it's not.
Yeah, it absolutely isn't. Yeah, it's really quite gripping, and at the heart of it, I suppose there is also this kind of a love story, really. There's the relationship story of the family, but there's also the story of Sashi growing as a young woman and there being a young man in her life that she's particularly interested in, and how that works in a war where young men are being kind of drawn into these kind of big political movements. And that character, again, is one that is based on a real figure at the time. So obviously adjusted.
And the other quality I thought of the book is it's very much it takes you there. You get, you know the sights, the smells, the tastes, the you know, you can imagine, you know, the house that someone's in, or there's a sort of the temporary hospital in tents that she works in. You know, I could picture
really
that
very vividly, captured.
You know, really vivid, and it's longish, not overly long, I thought, and it's sort of, she does, you know, the pace goes up and down in a way. That's one of the things that made it feel like a memoir, because you know, it doesn't feel sort of artificial. There's a natural flow of the way, you know, lives go like that, you know. And she doesn't write Sashi as sort of totally heroic character, you know, like
absolutely not. You can understand why she makes each of her decisions, but she's completely human.
So another thing that I wanted to mention was that one of the reasons we picked this as the book to read together was because you had read a few months ago another book about the Sri Lankan Civil War.
Yes, so that was The Seven Moons of Marley Almeida, and you might have you have it there.
I have it here. So
Karina Talaka.
Yeah. So this one was published in 2022, and Brotherless Night in 2023. So, you know, they were like almost simultaneous, I suppose. And
and I guess like it's interesting that two books of such quality came out so close together about the same sort of context, although they're set during different time frames of the war. But I suppose we were sort of reflecting that with the war having ended in 2009, it's kind of the length of time that it's been is almost long enough for people to have got to that point where they've been able to process it. And I think with The Seven Moons, he also said it was a book that took years to write.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the interesting things is that they're very, very different books, but they both have a character that's based on the university lecturer who was the human rights activist, but obviously they wouldn't have known that about each other. But that, so that sense of the timing of writing now about the Sri Lankan Civil War, with that sense of witnessing, record, documenting, which that character epitomizes. You feel that that's an influence on both writers. This is also an extremely good book and won the Booker in 2022. So we have a Booker winning one and a Women's Prize for Fiction winning one.
And yeah, when we're talking about the idea of sort of reporting or recounting and what that represents, the main character in Seven Moons is a photographer, isn't he? So he's also sort of very much involved in that.
And he does.
How do we accurately represent what went on?
Yes, yeah. And his motivation is a little different, but it's similar. I mean, he finds himself taking photos for press, but also for the army, but also for the secret, British, CIA. Yeah. He's taking photos for lots of. But it's the same thing. It's basically he's hanging on to copies of those photos because of that wish to have that record, bear that witness. Yeah. So it's obviously a profound urge, isn't it?
And both I suppose both of those main characters reflect how in a civil war you do find yourself working for people that you might not have thought that you would work for, and supporting causes that you might not really feel that you support, or the multiple grey areas that you get pushed into as a result of that type of conflict.
Absolutely. So I also got to I read this. You read this before Brotherless Night. I read it after Brotherless Night. I think reading the pair is a really rich experience. They're very different, but in a sense complementary, and I'm very, very happy that we picked Brotherless Night as our May book, aren't you?
So that was our May book. So June is very nearly over. So what are we doing for June?
Well, and I've already read it, and you're about to start it, aren't you? The book we're reading,
I'm lagging behind.
In June is You Dreamed of Empires. It's by Alvaro Enrigues. And he's a Mexican author, and it was published in Spanish in 2022, but the English translation has just come out this year, 2024, translated by Natasha Wimmer. And it's kind of historical fiction with a twist, and it's about the Cortez Montezuma encounter. Yeah. So we'll talk about.
I look forward to that
soon. We're slightly less behindhand with our June recording. Yeah. And so
thank you very much.
Thank you and goodbye, and see you all soon.